flow equals 0. So we were either at the top, right, of a breath, or we were at the bottom of a breath. The flow was 0, because atmospheric pressure was 0, therefore alveolar pressure was 0, right? And we saw that we could calculate our two transmural pressures, one at that lung wall and one at that chest wall, right, pulmonary wall, chest wall. Those were our two pressures that we could calculate across those two walls using the three spaces, right, the three spaces on either sides of those walls. So we saw all that stuff, right? So now let's look at a bunch of flowcharts, right? Taking a look at the specifics with some details in there of what are these changes that are going to happen with all these values, right? In all these different locations. What are more of the specifics of what's going to happen when we go from the bottom and then we breathe in, and then we go from the top and then we breathe out. Good? Even though we know overall what's going to happen, we already established that way at the beginning. But let's look at some of the details that'll help us understand, like exactly what's happening. Exactly why is this happening, right? And why does it work? So we're going to start here at the bottom, where there's 0 flow at the bottom, right? The bottom of a breath. And we're going to see, how do we take a breath in? All right. So we'll start at the top with the diaphragm. Remember diaphragm? We haven't mentioned that yet, but remember diaphragm. And intercostals. Which intercostals of external and internal are going to be in charge of expanding the cage, increasing the volume of the cage? Remember from anatomy, which one's external or internal? Intercostals. We're going to help that diaphragm increase the volume of the cage. So we have to pull up on the ribs all together.
Good for step up.
External, good. The external ones were running this way, right? And they were pulling from the rib above and they're pulling on the rib below to lift. Right? And we do that with all the ribs at the same time. We do it with bigger volume. Good? All right. So, along with the diaphragm, those external intercostals, they're all going to contract. Right? They're all going to contract, and by doing that, we increase the volume of that cage. Right? Increase the volume. So that's this. We know that if we increase the volume of that cage, what are we doing with, first of all, just in general, right? Let's just remember that in general. When you increase volume, what do you do with pressure? Decrease pressure. Okay, so we know that in general. Let's be more specific, right? And let's say, it's actually that intrapleural pressure that's going to be doing that decreasing, right? That's the pressure that's just inside the chest wall, right? Right? So it's really that one that is going to be directly affected by that increase in volume. Good? So it's the intrapleural pressure that's going to drop when you increase the volume of the cage. Good? All right. The space that's immediately inside the cage. That one drops. All right. So if it drops, it becomes more negative, right? If we had started, let's say we were starting at flow 0, right? If this intrapleural pressure, now that we've changed it, we've made it more negative, if it drops below atmospheric pressure, right? Atmospheric pressure, do you see how we can start plugging in numbers, right? We can use our equation, right? And here's alveolar pressure, whatever that is. Oh, it was 0, right? It was 0 minus some now negative intrapleural pressure. It became more negative, right? We don't have hard numbers yet, but just talk, right? It becomes more negative. What happens when you take 0 minus a negative, positive, right? So that transpulmonary pressure, is increasing, right? Okay, increasing. And we saw already that if we were to do that, the lungs themselves, right, are going to expand, right? When the pressure across that wall, that transpulmonary pressure, right, increases. Right? Okay, so we're going to increase that volume. If we increase the volume of the lungs, what's going to happen to the pressure of the air inside the lungs, which is our alveolar pressure? Decrease that one, right? Okay, so we decrease that alveolar pressure. If we're decreasing that pressure, oh, oops, that was at 0, right? So we're definitely below 0 on that one. Okay, if we're below atmospheric pressure, what has to happen? Air has to move, right? Air is going to flow in, right? So that's our result. Air flows in. You see it? So we have, I don't know, a couple extra little steps, right, in there compared to what we said at the beginning, which was, oh, we're just going to like increase the volume and decrease the pressure inside that container, and then the air is going to want to move in, right? We have, I don't know, some little steps in between. We have to account for all of our little spaces, right? And that, oops, that wall on the inside that gives us like an extra space, basically, right? So we have to account for atmosphere, chest wall, the space inside the chest wall, oops, and then a whole other wall. And the space inside that whole other wall. Good? So we have to go step by step. Good? All right. But even though we're going step by step, as long as you keep all of the walls and spaces in order, you can totally figure it out based on, is the volume bigger or is the volume smaller, right? Does the pressure go down or does the pressure go up? Just keep the walls and spaces straight, and then you've got it. Good? All right, so it's I don't know, it's not too bad. It's a little bit bad. But I hope it's not too bad. Okay, so here we've got basically a summary of what I was just saying, right? To help you to for sure, keep it really straight in your head, so that, you know, if you're, oh my goodness, you're in the exam and like, a little panic sets in and you kind of blank out on something, right? Like on some little detail, or like, oh, I don't know, where should I plug in this number? I don't know, right? I forgot the equation, or I don't know, it's anything. Something blanks out. If you can somehow come back to this and just at least remember the setup, right, and exactly just where is everything, then just take a deep breath and say, okay, I remember the setup, right? So I can work it out. Right? I can think through it and work it out based on the setup. So just remember, right? Chest wall, that's our first wall. We have this space. We have our second wall on the inside, right? Pulmonary wall or lung wall. Our space in between, right? And then our space inside. Good? And you can have your mathematical equations, right? Pressure differences across each of the walls, and you're always going to take inside minus outside, right? For calculating each pressure difference across each wall. Inside minus outside. All right. Good. All right. Let's see. So here's a table that, I don't know, it's just a different way of looking at all the stuff that we looked at and kind of focusing on the mathematical equations and plugging in a few numbers. We already talked about all this stuff, right? So this is just a reminder of everything that we said. Great. So now we're going to look at an abnormal situation that will help us to really solidify what's normal, right? So here we see both lungs inside the rib cage, and here on the right side we've got a normal lung, normal situation, and here on the left side, oops, looks like we've got a shriveled up lung, right? This would be a collapsed lung. Let's see how this has happened. Oops, looks like they made a hole, right, at the top of the thorax. Maybe, I don't know, maybe this is like some stab wound or something, right? And stab and then remove the knife kind of thing. And there's a hole, right, in the chest wall that exposes the intrapleural space to the outside directly, right? Directly to the outside. So based on what we already know about all those pressures that we set up so carefully, right? Remember, at rest, our intrapleural pressure in here was -4. Remember, that was like at rest, right? Compared to 0. Remember that? Okay, oops, if we make a hole right there in between the wall, okay, what's going to happen? Where's the air going to want to move? In through the hole, right? Which it does. It moves in through the hole. Oops, and now we just messed everything up, right? By allowing all this air to rush in to this space. We messed up our whole nice little -4 and balancing, right? Just enough to balance out the recoil of the lungs. We just messed the whole thing up, right? So now that recoil of the lungs is strong enough to collapse the lung, to cause it to completely recoil. Make sense? So it literally collapses. Good? All right, so that's how that happens. Good? So this we would call a pneumothorax. So air entering into the thorax. That's what that is. All right. Good. You can fix that by putting in a tube and like sucking that air out and closing the hole. All right. So let's see. But hopefully that helps us to kind of solidify what's normal by looking at a little abnormal situation. All right. So here's another flow chart looking at the opposite. How are we going to get the air out, right? So the first flow chart was take the breath in. We hit 0 flow at the top, and now this flow chart, let's get the air out. So we're going to stop the contraction of the diaphragm and those external intercostals. We'll just, we're going to see how we control those. I think that's in the next slide. So we'll stop the contractions for those muscles. Turn them off. So they're going to relax. And when they relax, we decrease the volume of the cage, right? Like the external intercostals, they relax, so the cage relaxes this way, or becomes smaller this way. And that diaphragm, remember, a contraction of the diaphragm is flat. So a relaxation of the diaphragm is a dome. So that, and that's inside. We don't see that unless you watch belly breathing, right? But we don't see the actual muscle. But by becoming a dome, we decrease the volume of the cage on the inside. Good? So we decrease the volume. And, if we decrease the volume, let's focus on, instead of the sort of general conversation that we had at first, let's focus our attention on that intrapleural space, because that's the space immediately inside the chest wall, right? So let's look at that one first, right? So remember, intrapleural. So we're bringing intrapleural pressure now actually back to where we started, right? We're going to come back to where we started. All right. That is going to change that transpulmonary pressure back to where we started, right? So we're going back to where we started, and the lungs are going to be able to recoil back to where we started. All right. When that happens, we're decreasing the sizes of the alveoli, right? Back to where we started. And we bring that alveolar pressure, momentarily, it's going to actually become greater than atmospheric. So which way is that going to flow? The air. Out, right? Out. And there you go. Out. Okay, so far, hopefully, making sense. Oh, it was good so far, right? And then there was this thing. Okay, this looks horrible. I'll admit that. However, this, at least this side of it, is nothing new except for the numbers, right? But the concepts are all the things we've been talking about. At this point, we're just going to put them all together in one place, and we're going to put in some numbers. So far, so good. Don't look at that graph over there yet. We'll look, but not yet, right? All right, let's just look at the picture and see what's going on. So we're going to start at the top. Oh, they put begin and end right up at the top. So we're going to start here. Looks like they're telling us end of expiration, so we're at the bottom, right? And we've got no flow. Great. We totally know this, right? Flow equals 0. The atmosphere we've set at 0. Therefore, alveolar pressure is 0, right? No flow. Great. We've got our tendency for the lungs, right? That's kind of there, right, at all times. And we already know also that at rest we can measure that intrapleural pressure to be -4. And we can calculate, like we did this stuff already, right? We can calculate that transpulmonary pressure, right, as 0 minus -4, which gives us our +4. Good? Which counterbalances perfectly this recoil tendency. So we've got our lungs held open with some air in them at all times, even though we're at the bottom of our breath, right? So this is something we should remember. Maybe for a little bit later, we're going to see something that will reinforce this idea that even at the bottom of our breath, we still have air in the alveoli, right, at all times. We never go completely, even if you were to, like this is kind of the bottom of a regular breath, but even if you were to like, ready, and then off, right, go to the bottom, even then, right, okay, so, even at the very bottom. We'll see that later. Big thing later. All right. So we're starting here. And now let's start our breath in. So muscles, right? Diaphragm, external intercostals. Increase volume on the chest wall. And let's just look at the numbers here. So I would like you to know these numbers at the start, because we keep saying the same numbers over and over again anyway. So that's simple enough. Don't worry about the transitional numbers because they are transitional, right? They change even like here and then, okay, somewhere in the middle. These are kind of changing numbers. But let's just look at how they're changing without necessarily memorizing, -1, 5, and -6, right? But let's notice that they are different, right? Specifically, this intrapleural pressure is -6. We started at -4, so it's more negative. We know, based on everything we've talked about so far, oh yeah, that's what was supposed to happen, right? Our intrapleural pressure, when we increase the volume of the chest wall, was going to drop. Okay, it dropped, right? We're not going to worry about exactly how much, but we're going to know it dropped. Okay, and if we just continue with our math, right, that's going to change that transpulmonary pressure. You see how it changed from +4, now it's at +5. Oh, so you change that, like this is all, now it's starting, oops, things are starting to change almost simultaneously. Good? All right. So, this arrow here is representing muscle contraction. This one over here. All right, so let's go all the way to the end of expiration. So we're at the top, right, or we're approaching the top. And then we get to the top, where we have, again, no flow, because atmosphere is 0, therefore alveolar pressure is 0, right? But now we're here. Good. Now we're here. So instead of 4 and -4 at the bottom, at the top, well, we're at -7 and +7. And actually, let's say it this way. Because that intrapleural pressure dropped all the way to -7, you just plug in the numbers to calculate that transpulmonary pressure. 0 minus -7 equals +7. Right? So here we are at, okay, just 0 flow at the top, 7 and -7. Perfectly balancing also. right? That tendency for the lungs to want to, right? All right. So fine. So that's where we're here. From here, let's go ahead and relax the muscles. All right. So we decrease the volume. Again, don't worry about the details of these numbers because they're just transitional numbers, right? But we'll know where we started. And let's see, that intrapleural pressure, okay, by now, let's say, okay, we pick a moment in the middle of this breath out and we hit -5. That's what we're expecting, right? We're expecting to come up from this -7 to this -5, and all these numbers are in the middle of also changing. That's okay. And eventually we hit the bottom, right, the end of our breath out. And we're where we started, right? Okay, so it's not that bad. This is all stuff that we've been talking about over and over and over again. We're just seeing it now in one place, and it's like a cycle, because we know we breathe in a cycle, right? So this is, so far, I hope not too bad. All right, now, let's take this, and let's make a graph, right? Because it's physiology, and we like to make graphs. So let's see, we have a graph here, and we're going to plot a couple different things over time. And they happen to give us 4 seconds, you know, like average breath at rest, like a single breath, 4 seconds. That's fine. You know, average person, blah, blah, blah. All that's the usual stuff. So 4 seconds. And this bottom chunk of the graph is just the volume of air in a breath, right? And they're measuring it in liters. So, looks like we're starting here at 0 and we're going up to ½ a liter. Let's remember that number. Remember that number, ½ a liter, because that's going to show up later, right? So let's go ahead and remember that right off the bat. In one regular breath at rest, we're going to move ½ a liter of air in and out. All right. And so we see, here's the beginning of the breath. We start at 0. And then we take our breath in, there's our ½ a liter, right? And then we just breathe it out. That's not bad. Let's see. And then our top, these 3 lines here in the top chunk, we're looking at pressures. And remember, we have arbitrarily set atmospheric pressure at 0. And then we go down in the negative range relative to 0. Or we can go up in the positive range, again, relative to 0. All right, let's look at intrapleural pressure. Oh my gosh, intrapleural pressure first. So we're starting at rest. We started at -4, right? And then we took our breath in. At the top of that, we ended up at -7, and then we let our breath out, and we return to where we started. So that's that, Tracy. That's not too bad. And then transpulmonary pressure, right, which was the pressure we calculated across that lung wall. We started at +4. We took a breath in. We hit +7 at the top. And then we come back to where we started. So that's how the pressure across that lung wall changes over the whole entire cycle. It's not too bad. All right. Here's this purple line, alveolar pressure. So the air pressure inside the alveoli. We started at 0. That was flow equals 0, right? And because atmospheric pressure is 0, therefore alveolar pressure was 0. And we took our breath in, right? And we kind of had a transition there where we dip down, and then we come back to 0 at the top. And then we take our breath out. We have a little transitional moment in there, and then we come back to 0. Make sense? Yeah, those are kind of good. All right, not too bad. All right. So this slide, for sure, like this is the big summary of everything. All the slides before it kind of get us to here. So, I mean, you know all the other slides, right? Because that's getting you to here. But this is like the ultimate slide as far as memorizing slides, right? And understanding. I know I joke around about memorizing, but understanding.
Transpulmonary that means that was at the bottom of expiration.
Let's see, so here,
Yeah.
so here we've got, so here we're starting at the bottom, right? And then we take our breath in. So this is like the top, and then we come back to the bottom, our original point, yeah. Okay, good. Good? Kind of makes sense? All right, so super important slide. Man, that's the one. That is the one. Let's see. All right, so now let's look at these muscles, right, and how we can control some things. Let's see. So just anatomy review, right, but let's just point out to be sure diaphragm, looks like external intercostals, internal intercostals. We also have a couple of accessory muscles that could kick in, right? Pec minor, sternocleidomastoid and scalenes, even obliques, right? If you're really, really maybe not at rest, right? And you got for a run or something, or a big workout or something like that, right? We can get other muscles to kick in and help us. So that's review of anatomy. Let's see what else. Oh, yeah, I did put a question in here. What is the innervation of the diaphragm? Wow, what nerve went to the diaphragm to tell it to contract? Huh? Not vagus. Because diaphragm is a skeletal muscle, right? So vagus nerve, being parasympathetic, right, is not going to be able to touch skeletal muscle. Let's see, let's have a clue. It comes from the, remember the plexuses? Like there were spinal nerves, there were plexuses. One was cervical, one was brachial. Those were the other plexuses, but these were in lower body anyway. So let's see. Let's focus in on that cervical plexus. Cervical plexus. So something coming from, your spinal cord. And there was a big messy plexus. And then there was like this one particular nerve that had a name to it. And it exited the plexus. And then it like, traveled on either side of the heart to touch that diaphragm. And innervate that diaphragm. And tell it. What?
Right.
Rennick. Okay,
Oh,
good.
that's right.
Huh?
Oh, that's right.
Good. Woo! Rennick nerve. Awesome. Yay! All right, very good. Very good. This is why I deep down inside prefer like anatomy and physiology to like being the same course. It makes more sense. Anyway, that's all right. We gotta go because I know like nursing schools especially want them to be like separated out. Okay. So go with it. Let's see. We have a new vocabulary word now, which is compliance. Compliance. So not in physiology, but just out there. What does compliance mean in general? Not physiology. Huh?
To go along with.
Yeah, go along with, right? Any other ideas?
Agree with something.
Agree with something, right? I don't know, those are good. Those are good definitions. Okay, so here in physiology, especially respiratory physiology, compliance is talking about the lung tissue, which we've already started to talk about, having a lot of elastic, right? Elastic fibers. And yeah, it stretches, but also recoils, right? So when we talk about compliance and that stretchiness and desire to recoil, that, right? Compliance is, well, how easily does that lung tissue stretch and recoil? Or how difficult is it for that lung tissue to stretch and recoil, right? So, in this graph, we've got lung volume over here, so that would be how much air is in the lungs, right, at a particular moment, and that moment down here is going to be defined by, our transpulmonary pressure, and we totally know how to calculate that, right? And we know that this will change whether we are taking a breath in or taking a breath out, right? So depending on where we are, right, we will have different amounts of air in the lungs. And if we plot that, those two things on the same graph, we happen to get a line that can tell us how smoothly, or maybe not smoothly, but easily that lung tissue is allowing us to do all this stuff, right? So we're getting at, is a person's, an individual's lungs healthy, or is there something wrong in the tissue? Not inside the alveoli, but in the tissue in between the alveoli. It has the tissue for this particular person, for some reason, maybe stiffened up, right? Or loosened up, right? So we can look at this green line representing this is normal person, blah, 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 right? And we would end up with a curve like this. So at a higher transpulmonary pressure, like any one, let's pick a point, I don't know, let's pick a point here. So we'll pick a point here. This is like a lower transpulmonary pressure. We would be able to fill the lungs this much in this particular person who's normal, right? Same person, we increase the transpulmonary pressure. Remember, same person, right? We can fill the lungs, right? This much. Okay, that should hopefully make sense. Let's take a person who for some reason has some disease process going on in their lung tissue, right? That causes the lung tissue to become less stretchy and recoily, right? So the word we use for that is it becomes stiffer, right? It becomes stiffer. So it doesn't move as well, right? As nicely. So let's do the same thing. That person, not normal, not healthy, right? For whatever reason. I'm not going to judge, right? So let's take the lower transpulmonary pressure. I'll try to pick about the same one, right? So we'll come up here. Looks like we cannot fill the lungs as much as we were able to fill in the normal person, right? At that same transpulmonary pressure, like we were, let's say, here, a little bit. In. Now we take a bigger breath in, right? By we increase that transpulmonary pressure to at least try to take a bigger breath in. Remember out here, normal person can fill the lungs very nicely, right? Oops, not normal person with stiffer lung tissue trying to, right, create that same pressure up here, but, because the lungs are actually stiffer, can only fill them this much. Make sense? So that's what we're getting at with compliance. Good? The opposite would happen. The opposite would happen if you have sort of, really like very sort of free or in great, awesome super shape, right? And you've got great compliance, like better than average. Good. So at a certain, you just took a little breath in, to really fill up those lungs, and then of course max out, right? With just big pressure, so much air. It's like super awesome shape. All right. Good, so that's all about compliance. All right, so taking this idea of compliance one step further. Here are the two factors sort of feeding into compliance. One we just talked about, the stretchiness of the lungs, right? How easily they can stretch and recoil, or how difficult it is to stretch and recoil, which makes them stiff. So that's one thing, that's based on elastic tissue, basically. All right. The other thing that factors into how compliant are those lungs. What did we talk about at the top of the class? What word did we mention? And it starts with an S and there was an F in the middle. Surfactant, right? And I said, we're going to talk about surfactant later, right? So let's talk about surfactant now. Okay, so surfactant. Remember we had type 2 alveolar cells. in the alveolar walls, right, producing this stuff called surfactant, right, and secreting that surfactant. So surfactant is made up very heavily, there's protein in there, but also a lot of phospholipid. So protein and phospholipid is surfactant, right? This liquid is made up of protein and phospholipid. So let's backtrack and pretend we have an alveolus, right? Let's say a balloon that, first, let's just put a few drops of water. Let's actually imagine a balloon, right? Like a real balloon. So if we have a balloon that's a new balloon, brand new balloon. Take it out of the bag. And it's like empty. And then we're going to put a few drops of water. Just a few drops. Not like water balloon, right? But just a few drops of water. So what is going to happen to the walls, right? If it's collapsed, we'll talk about the balloon itself as walls, right? So what happens to the walls of the balloon when you put a few drops in? Huh? They stick together, right? You can also imagine, like everybody's used like slides. I know in anatomy they were prepared slides, but at some point has everyone used a slide where you had to prepare it and put like a sample on there and put a drop of water on the slide and then you put the cover slip on? And once you put that drop of water, they stick, right? The two pieces of glass also stick. It's so hard. I mean, it might actually break before you can even pull them apart, right? So that quality of water, a thin film of water, when it's pretty close to pure water, right? That quality is called surface tension. That desire for the water molecules to stay close to each other, right? Stay close to each other. So if you put that thin film of water between two pieces of glass or two sides of a balloon, right? Those pieces of glass or those sides of the balloon will also end up wanting to stick together because the water is sticking together, right? So if we now try to blow up that balloon that has the two walls stuck together because of that thin film of water sticking them together, because there's so much tension between the water molecules, it's very hard, right, to blow up that balloon. Maybe you can't even blow up that balloon, right? I don't think I'd be able to blow up that balloon, right? So, same thing with alveoli. Now we think of alveoli as balloons. If the alveoli had pure water lining the inside surfaces, we know we have a lot of water in the body, right? So if we just lined it with water, we could do that. But what would happen to our alveoli, which are like the balloons? The walls would stick together, right? And then if you tried to breathe in, like get some air into that, it would be like trying to blow up the balloon. It would be very difficult. You would have to like expend so much effort, right? Just to like pop it open in the first place, let alone fill it with air, right? Even just to do that much would require so much effort, right? That is way too much ATP to expend, right? On these muscles for every single breath. We'd have nothing left to do other stuff, right? Because we'd be just focusing on just popping open our alveoli every breath. That's a waste. Oh my goodness. So let's be more efficient and let's insert something in between the water molecules that will break up all that tension in between the water molecules. Reduce the surface tension in the water, right? So that we relax, right? See, this is too much tension. Relax. So the stuff is this surfactant, right? Surfactant. Proteins and phospholipids insert that in between the water, right? And they're keeping the water apart from each other. And we relax. The walls stay away from each other. This is easy to fill up, right? Because it's already apart. So we don't have to put in so much effort, right? Muscular effort to fill the alveoli, right? Make sense? All right, so surfactant is what we're going to use to do that. So, surfactant secreted by those type 2 cells if we sort of backtrack into fetal development, that surfactant is going to be starting to be produced by these type 2 cells around the 26-week mark of pregnancy. So the whole beginning part, right? Just past the midpoint, really. Type 2 cells, quiet. I mean, the baby's not breathing air anyway, right? So why waste that energy, right? If the baby's not going to breathe air, it's got a long way to go, right? But now we're past the halfway mark. We're kind of entering into third trimester. Well, it's getting a little close, right? So type 2 cells are going to start kicking in, right? They're going to be triggered by, we do not have a cortisol group, right? An adrenal cortex group. I'm going to take that, right? And then I'm going to say it now. Adrenal cortex of the baby is going to be signaled to start producing this hormone called cortisol. We'll talk more details about cortisol when we get to endocrine, but I'm going to talk about it, so I'm going to talk a little bit about it now. So this cortisol travels around baby's bloodstream, gets to the type 2 cells, and tells them, start working. We're going to have to go soon, right? And breathe air. It's going to be no good. So, like as it is, it's going to be no good. So we better get ready. Right? So, type 2 cells start producing surfactant to start lining the alveoli, right, and start making them nice, prepared, ready for air, right, air breathing. So, when the cells first start doing that, and they're just producing a little bit, right? So, if the baby is born at that point when type 2 cells are just producing a little bit, not ready, because it's not enough. Like the baby's not producing enough surfactant yet. So, baby born this early, too difficult, and they're the ones who stay in the hospital, the incubator and the pressure machines, right? And they are assisted with their breathing because they are still at this. Maybe it's not this, but maybe it's like this, right? Every breath is very difficult. Good. So they have to stay in the hospital, and part of the regimen is not only breathing for them, basically, but also giving steroids. And cortisol, we will learn, is steroids. So we're giving the baby cortisol, basically, to encourage, like, hurry up, type 2 cells, but basically we're just waiting, right? So the baby stays in the hospital. Usually it's the amount of time that the baby would have stayed in the womb, right? Is more or less, that's what you should anticipate, right? Is, well, we're just waiting for the baby to mature, right? Specifically the type 2 cells to mature so that they are producing enough surfactant to, right, breathe on their own. So you really don't get to that point until like that last month, really. So anything before that last month of pregnancy, baby's probably going to stay.
That happened to my boyfriend.
Yeah.
He was born a month early.
Yeah.
Oh, my lungs were
Right. It's
so I
true.
keep educating him. I'm like, oh, this is why.
See, now you can say this is all.
Like, who asked about
Yeah,
it?
this is all the stuff that happened. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna ask, is that why they have premature babies who have respiratory problems, have them breathe like a super saturated oxygen solution?
Right. Exactly. So part of it is to try, and that's going to kind of lead into like the whole next section of respiratory, which is looking at actual oxygen. Like so far we haven't looked at oxygen really, right? We've just been talking about air, right? So our next step is to look at oxygen, and we're controlling pressures in that incubator, but we're also delivering like more oxygen than is here, right? To give the baby an even better chance of grabbing what's available in the air. Good? That's going to be our next section. Good. Very good. All right, super awesome. All right. My little brother was one of the first babies who survived. They used to die before like the 1970s because the technology was not able to save them. So he was one of the first to survive. So yeah. All right. So let's see, we just got a summary of surfactant. We talked all about surfactant, so this just, you know, good, look at all that stuff. So that's awesome. Let's see, oops. Oh, yes. Let's see, if we get to do the lab, right, this is what we'll be working with in the lab. So, I'm not going to spend too much time on this yet, hoping that we'll work out the machines like by Tuesday. If not, we'll return to this and, you know, kind of hash it out without a lab, right? But just in general, this is a graph, chart, defining a whole bunch of vocabulary that goes along with breathing. And we've got a set of values that we could measure, and they would be volumes of air in the lungs at different times, right, under different situations, depending on how you're breathing. And then we also have a set of what are called capacities. Capacities are values that are derived from the volume. So you can add a couple of volumes together and get one of the capacities, that kind of thing. So go through, at least to prepare for if we do the lab, it's good, might as well, because you're going to have to know them for an exam anyway. Go through the words, any abbreviations for each of the words, know those, know the definitions, right? So what is tidal volume? What is vital capacity? Those over here. Do not worry about the numbers except for two of them. The two numbers I would like you guys to memorize for the exam would be tidal volume. Oops, remember I said half a liter? Like regular breath at rest. There it is. That's what I said. Right? Okay, so there it is. And then we have total lung capacity. Total lung capacity, 6 liters. So what do you think total lung capacity would be, just from how it sounds? Total lung capacity.
How much volume the lungs can take in?
Right, like total, right? Super maximum, right? Like take the biggest breath possible. And that's how much your lungs can hold, right? Okay, fine, right? That would be look at 6 liters. Cool. All right, super awesome. So start working that into your heads. We'll see if we can get to the lab. That'll, just be like measuring all these things. It's kind of fun. If not, we'll talk a little bit more, bummer. But okay, so look at that. Here we've got like a simplified representation of I don't know, maybe compartments of the lungs, but kind of starting up where you have like the mouth and the trachea, right? And kind of chunking things into different sections, right? More of these upper areas, and then of course alveoli down here. And if we kind of focus in on these upper areas, right? We can sort of summarize like the upper areas and say, okay, we'll represent that by this like rectangle right here. And this would be, okay, all of our alveoli down here. So these upper areas, they also, just like the alveoli are always going to have some air in them. We said that before, they're always going to have some, right? Even at the bottom of your breath. Even, remember I did that thing where I pushed out all the air? Even then, we'll always have something in the alveoli, right? Just to keep them at least a little bit open. Plus that surfactant, right? So, just like that is the case also in the upper airways. We always have something in there, right? That amount, here they're giving us 150 milliliters, that's sort of that regular average person. And remember we always said like, oh, the average person was like that 70 kilo person, right, which is about a 150 pound person. So super general rule of thumb, like general, it's not absolute, but super general rule of thumb is that the volume of that space in the upper airways, it's kind of, that's always air that's in there is going to be about equal to that person's weight in pounds, right? So an average person, right, the 70-kilo person, 150-pound person, right, 150 milliliters of air hanging out in kind of this upper area. All right, fine. We're going to give that a name. We'll call it anatomical dead space. That doesn't sound good, right? Anatomical dead space. But they call it that because there's no air exchange, no gas exchange. I shouldn't say air exchange. No gas exchange happening in the anatomical dead space. All the gas exchange is happening in the alveoli at the respiratory membrane, right? But sometimes we're going to have to account for air and talk about it, the air that's in this dead space, right? Even though we're not exchanging gases, it's there, right? So sometimes we have to address it, right? So we should know what that is. Let's look up here. They just happen to be showing us here. They sort of took a chunk and they said, well, this is tidal volume. Remember, tidal volume was at 1/2 liter, the air that we were going to move, right? So they're showing us here it is waiting, like here, and then here we breathed it in. And here's the chunk of that tidal volume that is kind of pushing itself lower, and here's the chunk, like pushing itself lower into the alveoli, and here's the chunk that's, kind of hanging out up here. Good? All right. So that's it, stuff about anatomical dead space. Okay, great. So, we've seen how we can take a chunk of air and kind of push it into the alveoli, right? Of course, we're going to push that out of the alveoli, right? So in the alveoli, we're constantly having some air, like a chunk of air pulled in and a chunk of air pushed out. So far, we have not gotten to gas exchange at all, which is okay, right? Let's just now look at moving this chunk of air into the alveoli and out of the alveoli, right? So kind of below that dead space. All right. Let's see. We've got 3 different situations. Here they happen to give us 3 different subjects. You could also take the same person, right? One subject and have them breathe in 3 different ways. So let's talk about 3 different ways that you could breathe. One would be, let's look at the one in the middle. See if we've got tidal volume, right? That was regular breath at rest. Here, that's our 1/2 liter, right? So that would be regular breath at rest. Okay, so when we're at rest, we're breathing regularly. Let's assume that at rest we're going to breathe. This is our respiratory rate. Respiratory rate. Okay, fine. We could multiply that. Like now we have like our next mathematical equation. We could multiply that and get a new value, which we're going to refer to as minute ventilation. Minute ventilation. So basically, we're talking about how much air are we pushing or moving in and out of those alveoli in a minute, right? In and out, in and out, in and out. How much of that air? Remember that chunk that was moving into the alveoli and then moving out? How much are we moving over the course of a minute? If we're at this tidal volume, 1/2 liter at rest, we're just hanging out right now, right? And we're breathing at this rate, right? Also, we're hanging out. Good? So this is how much air, probably all of us, right? Or most of us, this is how much we're each sort of moving in and out of the alveoli over a minute. It's fine. Keep in mind this is milliliters. All right. So, now let's take into consideration this anatomical dead space, right? And stuff that's going to move in and out of that dead space. Average person, 150, right? Milliliters. There's our 12 breaths per minute, and here's the number that would end up with, right? We end up with. So we've got 2 numbers here now: minute ventilation and this ventilation in that anatomical dead space. Good. We can take these 2 numbers and plug them into one last mathematical equation. One last mathematical equation, which is this one, to get that alveolar ventilation. How much air are we really moving in and out of those alveoli, right? The alveoli. So, we take this number, and then we subtract from that one this number, and we get that number, right? How much air are we really moving in and out of those alveoli? Good? So, let's look at this number that happens to be the number we ended up with at this regular breath. Right? Regular rate, regular breath at rest, average person. Good? All right, so we've got this. Let's look at a different situation. Let's look over here. Could be a different person who's breathing at a different rate, or could be the same person breathing differently. So let's see, tidal volume is now 150 milliliters per breath. That's quite a bit less, right, than regular. So maybe those are like shallow breaths, right? If you're moving less, shallow. Okay. Oh my, look at that respiratory rate. That's rather high, 40, right? So let's say you were sitting at rest and breathing like that, not exercising, because we know if we exercise, we're going to breathe faster, but we would probably breathe deeper also. But let's say at rest, we don't have to do it. I don't want anybody to pass out, right? But let's say we were at rest and you suddenly start, maybe, I don't know, maybe you got really nervous for some reason and you started like breathing very shallowly and very quickly. Huh. I mean, we know sort of instinctually what happens when you get kind of lightheaded and pass out, right? Why? Why would we do that? Let's see. Let's explain it from this respiratory angle, right? So we can take these two numbers, multiply them, get that minute ventilation, right? How much is passing through in a minute, right? Well, that looks the same. All right, let's look at anatomical dead space, right? And see how much, again, it's 150, because we'll take, let's take the same person, right? Somebody starts that kind of breathing. All right, so same persons, has the same anatomical dead space, but breathing way faster. Let's multiply that. Oh, well, that's higher, right? That's higher here, the amount that's passing through that anatomical dead space. Now, when we plug that into this to see how much is passing in and out of those alveoli, right, and we plug our numbers into here, oops, 6,000 minus 6,000, 0. 0. Wait, if 0 air is actually passing in and out of the alveoli, 0? Does that sound not good? If 0 air is actually making it in and out of the alveoli, and alveoli are, that's our location for gas exchange. We haven't gotten to gas exchange yet, right? But we know that that's what's coming up. If we have no air going to our location where we're going to exchange the gases, we can't exchange the gases, can we? Does this explain why you faint? No. Because no air was getting in, right? To the alveoli. Air was getting in the dead space, right? But air wasn't really making it, right, down to the alveoli and going in and out of those alveoli. Make sense? Huh. Okay, let's look at our opposite situation. We can take the same person, right? And have that person, oh, wow, we're going to double that tidal volume. That must be bigger breaths, right? Let's even take fewer of those breaths, right? Because they're just so big. So we have big, slow breaths. Good. Maybe we're in yoga class. Or maybe, no, let's not do an activity. Let's stay resting. But maybe we decided to meditate, right? So the yoga instructor, instead of having a class, came in here and said, okay, close your eyes, just slow down your breathing, right? Right? Do that. Oh, it probably feel good, right? Let's do some math, and we're going to feel good while we do the math. Seems like the same number anyway. Good. And we feel good realizing it's the same number. anatomical dead space, same person, so it's still 150, but only 6 breaths per minute. That's a lower number. Let's subtract. Look at that. That ends up higher. Wow. So actually entering into and exiting those alveoli, where we're going to exchange the gases, we're actually having more, right? More air. Of course, we'll see later that that means more oxygen. So if we're having more oxygen enter into those alveoli over the course of a minute, maybe we could take more of that, right? And deliver. Right? Especially they talk and imagine a nice beach, whatever, right? They always do that. Imagine yourself on a beach, right? So, okay. Does that explain a lot of stuff that we know intuitively, right? Or maybe from experience or something like that. But now we see, oh my, there's like an actual physiological explanation for this. Huh. That's amazing. How much do we love that? Oh my. Oh, now we gotta start doing bad stuff, right? We gotta talk about, we were all relaxed, we were on the beach, and now. All right, so now we have brought air in and out of the alveoli, right? Brought air in and out of the alveoli, either normal or not enough or a lot, right? And we've seen you could have some results from that, right? Either normal, pass out, or maybe nice, right? Maybe relax. Okay, good. So, once we're in the alveoli, once we've pulled air into the alveoli, whatever amount, right? Now we're going to exchange the gases. So now we enter into like the next theoretical section of respiratory system. So we have completed the whole ventilation part, right? That was our first big chunk. All right, so now we a little bit shift gears and we start talking about gas exchange. Gas exchange. So we return to this style of drawing. The first style of drawing was like chest wall and lung wall with our 3 spaces, right? Now this style of drawing is looking at our little alveolus pouch, cardiovascular system, right, in the middle, and then cells out in the tissues, whatever tissues. All right, so let's start over here. Alveolus, air moving in and out, and now, because we're going to exchange gases, we have to focus on oxygen and carbon dioxide, right? So over here, we're going to look at oxygen. Over here, we're going to look at carbon dioxide. We're going to keep them separate for now. All right, so oxygen, the first thing that we have to establish is how much oxygen is in our air, right? Happens to be 21%. Most of the rest of that is actually nitrogen. Only a tiny little bit of it is carbon dioxide. Good? So, based on that, we will have a certain amount measured in milliliters of oxygen, right? In a certain, whatever, chunk of air, right? Okay, so, we're starting to look at some numbers, and they're a little bit ugly. Good thing that other section had just 0 and 4 and minus 4. Because this section, they keep it ugly. Alright, so we have some ugly numbers. Let's bring the oxygen into the alveoli. We know all about how to do that. Awesome. So now we're at the alveolus, we're at the respiratory membrane. That oxygen is going to be able to diffuse across the respiratory membrane and enter into the capillaries. Super awesome. Inside of capillaries, we know all about blood pressure, right? Uh-oh. Now, the 2 collide. Oh, respiratory and cardiovascular system collide. Oh my goodness. We know about blood pressure, right? So here we're going to talk about, for the moment, something a little bit different from blood pressure as we have been discussing. We're going to take from that only the oxygen's contribution to pressure in that fluid. Oxygen's contribution to pressure in that fluid. So, we can have, based on that, an amount of oxygen, right? An amount of oxygen that's in the blood. All right, we know that in the lungs, we have what's usually referred to as deoxygenated blood, right? Kind of arriving at the lungs. And that's where we're going to pick up the oxygen. And then we've got what we refer to as oxygenated blood. Well, deoxygenated blood, it does not mean absolutely no oxygen, right? I mean, it kind of sounds that way, deoxygenated. But the truth is, it's not like total zero. We'll have some oxygen still, like floating in the blood. Now let's go ahead and we'll accept this number as blah, 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 normal conditions, average, right? Usual. This much oxygen in the blood as it is entering into the lungs, right? Coming from the body and the heart, right side of the heart, we go to the lungs. We're ready to pick up more fresh oxygen. Okay, we have this much blood. This much oxygen in the blood. That's what I meant. Huh. We're going to pick up some more oxygen, right? We're going to pick up some more oxygen here and add it to that amount. And that's how we end up with this new amount, right? We just add it together. So now we have more oxygen in the blood. And we bring that back to the left side of the heart, and we're going to pump that out. We'll keep the number the same because, like, we didn't use anything up when we were inside the heart, right? We just pump it out. Great. And we're going to let that go all around to the tissues, wherever, go to those capillary beds, wherever, right? And at the capillary beds, we're going to leave the capillary beds, go to the cells, right? And the cells are going to be wanting to use up that oxygen, right? Get that oxygen and use it up. So we're going to be always drawing oxygen into the cells, right? Let's go ahead and assume that this amount will be the same as this amount, right? For now, we're going to accept all these numbers. We'll explain more later, probably like next week. But let's assume now that these are going to balance each other out. Okay, fine. Oh, wow, that brings us back to this number. And this is the amount of oxygen that we deliver back to the right side of the heart, and we go back to the lungs, and we just keep going around. Good so far? All right, so this is like our basic set. We'll get more details next week. All right, let's look over here at carbon dioxide and see what is our basic setup for carbon dioxide. We're going to start down here because we're producing the carbon dioxide down at the cells, right? So cells produce carbon dioxide. We're going to let that go, and that's going to enter into the bloodstream, right? We're just going to go ahead and accept this number for the moment, right? This much carbon dioxide is going to be produced and enter into the bloodstream. If this amount is approaching the capillary bed and we add this much, fine, we just add, right? And we bring this amount back to the right side of the heart, we end up in the lungs, and let's drop off. Again, for now, we're going to assume we're going to keep this balance, we'll keep it the same, right? And we'll allow the same amount to just cross over into the alveoli. And then we end up just going around and around in circles, right? So here's our basic setup for carbon dioxide. Okay, and for now, like I said, we're going to accept the numbers for what they are. Talk more details, like I said, next week, and then we'll learn, like, why, right? All right, but for now, we're going to accept that. So let's have one last vocabulary word before we break for today. Respiratory quotient. Respiratory quotient. So this is a number that you can calculate, and it's a ratio, so something over something, and it is the amount of carbon dioxide produced, of course, by the cells, over the amount of oxygen consumed, right, taken in and used by the cells. And that relationship will depend on what fuel did those cells use. What fuel did those cells use? So I'm going to go to the next slide because that just has a summary of all those respiratory quotients. If you use carbs, the respiratory quotient is 1, right? 1. Meaning 1 molecule of CO2 for every 1 molecule of oxygen, right? 1 over 1 is 1, right? Okay, if you use fats, it changes. It changes to 0.7. So 7 molecules of carbon dioxide for every 10, right? To the 0.7. Proteins, and then mixed diet is, a little bit of everything, right? Which probably most of us, a little bit of everything, right? Good? So these are just numbers. Let's know them for now. We're not going to use them a whole lot in this class, but I still want you guys to know them because some people are going to take these and, use them in the future. So let's know those for sure. So this is definitely our cutoff point for today. So let's see. Tuesday, no exam, but start getting this stuff in. Start, maybe plotting out your